is Maggie. I have an infertility diagnosis due to premature ovarian failure. Last week I made a video about our experience so far in the donor egg IVF process. This week I just wanted to make a video that explained a little bit more about picking a donor as far as what your options are for finding donor profiles, and then what information you have available to move forward with a donor. So that's what I plan to cover in more detail in today's video. So to start off with, where to pick a donor from. So I talked about in the last video the options of agencies and egg banks. So I'll start with the donor agency because that is what we have chosen to do to pick where we found our donor that we're trying to move forward with right now. So the agency that we're using is called Bright Expectations, and our IVF clinic owns this egg donor agency. So in the agency, you pick from donors that have expressed their willingness to be an egg donor and have met the clinic's criteria. So the agency criteria might be different. For example, our agency has the requirement of, the donor has to be a certain build / BMI and certain age. I'm certain most agencies are going to have age requirements for donor. They can't be too young or too old to get the best quality of eggs and so forth. And then one that I thought was a little bit interesting on ours, I noticed as a requirement, is that they'll only accept donors that have some sort of post-high school education, I believe even a degree post-high school. So because the agencies found that pretty much all the intended parents, they're looking for someone that has that, so they've just gone ahead and made it a requirement. So that's kind of what the agency is. As far as some pros of the agency is that you're picking a donor and you're getting a full cycle, a full retrieval of eggs from that same donor. So our goal with that is to be able to get a good amount of eggs and therefore some more embryos so that we could have multiple pregnancies from this same retrieval of eggs, and therefore the siblings of those pregnancies would have the same mother donor egg and then same father, my husband. So that's the goal there, and so that's the pro of doing the agency route, is that that's how they kind of package the donor. It's at least with the agency I've worked with, and then kind of what I've noticed looking around at some different agencies, is that that's kind of how they do it. You pick the donor, you get the retrieval after the donor's medical screening and formally agreeing to move forward with that donor. So that's the advantage there. And the advantage with this agency specifically for us is that the agency is owned by the IVF clinic. So the people at the clinic and the people at the agency, they're working together to help coordinate what the donor has to do, what my husband has to do, and what I have to do, so that we can move forward with the process and just kind of have it all working together, so I can call one place and get progress on all of those things, and they'll know what I'm talking about. So that's a definite pro as well. As far as cons, you do have to wait for the screening to happen. So with the egg bank, it's different. I'll get into that with the egg bank stuff, but that's a con, is the waiting, because as we found out, the first donor I picked wasn't good to move forward, neither was the second one. So and that can happen for various reasons, like you can find out that their reserve isn't what they'd like to see, for that they, being the doctor, what would be ideal to move forward with egg donation. You could find out that the donor just has some kind of unexpected conflict. That could definitely happen. You know, anything, because it's just a third person that you have to layer in that complexity with, and that's just not a good thing, not a bad thing, but just something that has to be accounted for. So that's with the donor agencies as far as how that works, and then big pros and cons from my perspective. Another big category of where to pick an egg donor from would be an egg bank, and for the most part with these, you're picking from donors who have already been screened and already done the egg retrieval. So you'll pick a cohort, is what their term is, a cohort of eggs from that donor that you pick, and usually it's 6 eggs. Now, there's a bunch of different options with the egg banks as far as I've seen, like bundles and packages, guarantees, like all this stuff, to kind of customize it for what you want as intended parents. So there's a lot to account for there, so a lot more options. As I said with the agency, it's just the one option, like that's what you're getting, which is good for us, but might not be good for everybody. And then with the more customization, that could also be more price friendly for you too, because you have more than just the one option. And then the major pro here, like I said, is you don't have to wait for that screening. It's already done, the eggs are ready to go, they're already frozen. With that, you only have the option for the frozen transfer. With the donor doing the new cycle, I could potentially have the option to do a fresh embryo transfer if that's what I wanted, and that's what my doctor suggested. That could potentially be an option if you wanted to do that as intended parents. The cons I can see for the egg bank is that I noticed that they don't pay, perhaps pay isn't the right word, but compensate the donors as well. The pricing that I saw for donors was between $3,000 and $7,000. Now on the agency side, I'm seeing in the range of $8,000 to $10,000 depending on the donor. As far as compensation for donors, it does vary. A woman can donate her eggs up to 6 times. So what I've seen, donors who get paid more is because they've had a cycle before that has gotten a good amount of eggs, and I think that they consider more than 18 as ideal and worthy of higher compensation. And then another thing that can result in higher compensation for the donor is if they're a highly sought after group, like Asian women are underrepresented in the donor population, so there's they get a higher compensation, and as are Jewish women, I think is one. But when I looked across egg banks as far as fees that they charged, there was almost across the board an additional fee to have an Asian donor. Now I don't know, as far as the agency side, there wasn't an across the board fee for that, but kind of getting on a tangent about fees, but that's something to keep in mind, is that what the compensation is for the donor. So, and just on the topic of that, for the egg bank side, is that I've noticed that they don't seem to compensate their donor in the same way, so I would consider that a con for the egg bank. And then something I don't think I touched on at all in my last video, because it hasn't been part of my experience, is the possibility of using a known donor. So that could be something that someone could try to do if you have a friend, or if the intended mother had a family member that she might want to have a donor for, that they already know. Now, having a known donor could be a pro, but also it could be a con, because it would add it's already complicated to have a donor pregnancy, but it would add more legal, emotional, psychological complications to have close friend or family member being the providing the genetic material, but not being the parent for that child. So definitely a big thing to consider, but it could also be a pro. So especially if I think of a non heterosexual relationship, I could see it being more of a pro in that situation. Just me personally, that's my opinion. That families, friends, like, that's different for literally everybody, so I can't say for sure on each situation, but just me thinking about it from my perspective, that's how I could see it. And then a pro on it too could be not paying the agency fees or donor compensation. Likely if it was a known person, that the donor wouldn't ask for compensation. Again, not in every situation, and even as intended parents, even if it wasn't required, you might want to. So again, different strokes for different folks, as one of my college professors used to say all the time. So yeah, those are 3 different options for picking a donor. And then as far as what criteria you have to pick from, there's a donor profile. These seemed pretty consistent between the egg bank and the agency. As far as differences is that the screening is already done on the egg bank side, so that donor profile is going to have some of that screening information in the donor profile. But I'm going to have a card that, or title kind of thing, that provides all of the information that is on the donor profile that you'd have to pick from. So it seems like this is all just based on what intended parents have asked for. As far as what we looked at when we were going to pick, it sounds kind of shallow, but kind of looked at appearances. We wanted to try to find a woman that had some similar characteristics to me, like I have brown eyes, brownish hair, the hair that's not dyed, and then I'm pretty tall, so tried to kind of find that. And then we looked at kind of heritage, and I'm kind of a mix of a lot of different European backgrounds, so kind of looked at that too. Wasn't a major factor, just because I'm not, you know, I could see maybe if I was 100% French or Irish or something like that, then I would have a stronger opinion on that. But since I'm, you know, a mix of a bunch of different things, it didn't play as big of a role for me. And then we looked at, there's parts on the donor profiles that the donor like provides information on, like her opinions, personality, stuff like that. And that was swaying for me too, because I, you know, wanted to kind of get an idea for what she's like as a person. Big thing on the donor profile that could make or break your decision too is whether the donor is open to an open relationship or an anonymous relationship. So that's a big factor to consider as well. Then I'm just checking out my notes here to see if there's anything I missed. The next big thing is moving on to the medical screening, especially on the agency side. The first part of that being whether the donor is available to do a cycle. They could have a conflict. They could have just gotten out of another cycle. So just because their profile's on there doesn't mean that they're ready to go the next day. So that's a big thing to consider. And then the screening I talked about more so in my last video, so definitely I'll link it up here, check it out. And then I'll also add a title card that will explain everything that's on the screening. But that can cause waits on the agency side. The day 3 testing has to be done on day 3, as the name indicates. So you could be waiting a month to do the day 3 testing. And then the genetic carrier testing ideally takes 2 weeks, but that's from what my clinic said, only if the donor doesn't have isn't a carrier for anything, which is possible but not likely. So they test for, I believe, over 100 different genetic conditions. So it's likely that they're going to be a carrier for something. And then if the donor is a carrier for something, then it's important that the father, intended father, so in my case my husband, is going to do a genetic carrier test as well. So then that could delay it even more so. And then there's just the thing about scheduling all this stuff too. In my case, my donor has to travel to do the in-person parts of the screening, like the Pap Smear, the FDA screening, blood type, carrier test, all that stuff. She's got to travel to do it. So that causes a delay as well. So perhaps the delay isn't the right word, but it's just something that you have to account for in the timeline. And everything, just any period of time where something can't happen just by a click of a button is, in my mind, like a delay. Even though it's just how time works, that you have to wait for an appointment. Sometimes it's not always going to be the next day, and I totally get it. It's just anyone who's done the IVF process knows is that it's always waiting. So I just wanted to explain more about where to pick a donor from, and a little insight into information that I didn't know about beforehand, so it might be useful to you if this is something that you're pursuing, the donor egg IVF, or if you know someone who is. I would love it if you reached out to me if you have done the donor egg IVF before, if you've been an egg donor, donor conceived, any affiliation with the process. I'm super interested in. If you're watching this informationally, thank you so much for watching. I'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, all of that stuff. I really appreciate you following along on my journey with this. Thank you so much.